I've been a financial advisor for just over 26 years. Prior to that, I was an auditor for Mankato State University, and the thing about auditing is people always told me that they liked me when I walked in the door but hated my guts when I left, because nobody really wants to do an audit, right? So the thing I like about financial planning is that people usually like me when they see me, and they love me when I leave, because I've provided so much value and provided so much opportunity for them to improve their lives and become more efficient and reach the goals that they've got. You know, my connection with cancer is probably most importantly through my mother. From diagnosis to death, it was two weeks. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Interestingly enough, she was a very Christian woman and witnessed to me and my 11 brothers and sisters what she was experiencing through that death. And I know I'm supposed to be talking about finance, but this is a very spiritual thing for me, a very important time in my life. It actually was the most important event in my life, even more important than the birth of my children, because I saw through her eyes what she experienced and know for a fact that there is a God, and that she showed that to us and explained. Interestingly enough, how could she do that? Explained what she was experiencing and who she was seeing and the loved ones that had predeceased her that she was now meeting again and seeing Jesus in front of her. And if I talk too much about it, I'll probably tear up. I would offer to you that I wrote a testimony for my church to share with the congregation. I remember my pastor, he was sort of cutting a little bit of a joke. He said, you know, Jim, that is the closest you'll ever get to heaven without actually being there. So I'm glad he added the other few comments. But the point is that I wrote this testimony and shared it with some other folks, shared it obviously with the congregation, and folks came up to me and asked me if they could share it via the internet. And I said, sure, and it started moving around the internet and so on. And with your permission, I'd be happy to share that story with you on your website, if you care to put it up on the website.
Most definitely.
You know, who isn't affected by cancer these days? I work with a whole bunch of clients, and whether they have cancer themselves or they've been touched by cancer, they're caregivers or not, everybody I feel has been touched by cancer. My mother-in-law has cancer, breast cancer. One of my best friends just recently died of esophageal cancer. And, you know, talking about your questions or where you were asking, you know, what do I say to people who want to offer help? It was so cool for me to be able to take John to his treatments periodically. I was one of a small group of people that were asked to take him to his treatments, which those 3 hours each time we were able to do it were really enjoyable for both of us. And for me, selfishly, it was a way for me to deal with the grief of knowing that he had what he was dealing with. And it's really more of, you know, to what Michelle said, it's not that, you know, it's really for them, not necessarily for you. You might not need the help, but they need to help you, you know. And going back to the spiritual side of things, this is why God wants us to help each other, because he knows the enjoyment that we get by doing so. So, anyway. Lots of people that I've dealt with when it comes to cancer, and, you know, frankly, I think the most important thing they ask is, what's next? What do I do? In fact, I know you have a question related to that, so I'm going to let you ask your question, and then I'll answer it.
So one of the questions we have is, what next? What do I do?
Come on now, you're going to say, what are 2 or 3, whatever, you know, ideas? I've got about 100 different ideas that I want to share with you. There's so many things that you can do to improve your financial life. I think, you know, again, Michelle also used an analogy of being a quarterback, and you didn't know that there might be a quarterback in the medical community, and she's kind of acting as that quarterback. I've used that analogy as a financial advisor, but I like a different analogy, to tell you the truth, which is more of a general contractor and an architect. Think about building your house. You know, and when you build a house, you usually, you know, first thing you got to do is hire an architect or a draftsman to create the plan, and then the general contractor implements that plan, and that person might bring together all different kinds of subcontractors to be able to build that physical structure. Well, it's the same kind of strategy when you're dealing with your financial house, because there's a whole lot of different options, in fact, there's 6 primary areas of your financial life that you should be thinking about or getting into. The first one is your present financial situation, and there we're talking about cash flow, budgeting, net worth, you know, how to build net worth, how to free up dollars from your cash flow so that you're not spending money on things that you don't need to be spending money on. And I've got some ideas that I wanted to share with you today that they're more specific, so you got some actual takeaways on how to do that. Protection needs, it's one of the biggest questions. I think it was Michelle who mentioned that also this morning, where she was talking about medical insurance and will insurance cover my, you know, my needs and so on. Hopefully you've actually looked at some of these things prior to finding out that you've got cancer, and you can deal with a number of these issues prior to having to deal with the psychological and emotional issues of having a disease. But what I find is that, you know, it's just human nature to put off what you don't, you know, it's not present of mind, and you just kind of push it aside and you put it off until something happens. And it doesn't have to be contracting cancer. It could be loss of a job, birth of a child, death of somebody in the family, just some like nudge that says, have you thought about these things? And it gets you into the frame of mind of actually trying to accomplish or make some positive or substantive change in your financial life. So I said there were 6. I only mentioned 2 so far. Investment planning, and you know, people think that that's maybe a whole nother world that they don't want to understand, don't want to understand. But there's some really simple key things that you can do within your investment plan to be a lot more efficient with your money that most people just aren't aware of. And again, I want to share some of those ideas as part of this conversation as well. Retirement planning, it's like investment planning. It's about but it's such a huge goal, and therefore we separate it out. You know, separate it from other accumulation goals. It's like, for most people, the big goal. And then tax planning, income tax planning, and estate planning. And I got to tell you, most people just do not spend time thinking about death. They don't think about it, their estate plan. So most people don't have even a basic estate plan, namely a will. You know, the fortunate thing about that is the government has some statistics out there that say that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 27 to 30 trillion dollars passing on from one generation to the next. And the expectation is that over half of that is going to end up in the pockets of the U.S. government through the form of estate tax. And it's because people haven't planned for it. And my job as advisor, I think, and as coach, is to get you to, you know, keep that money in the family as opposed to giving it to the government. I call that social capital. You know, you can either give it to the government and they can decide where to spend it for us, or you can keep it and decide what charitable organizations or what family members and so on you would rather give that money to. So being in control of your finances is kind of an important thing from my perspective, and that's the kind of knowledge and the experience that I want to share with the folks that I'm working with and all of you, to the extent that you're interested in getting that information.
Jim, one of the things that I've read from the American Cancer Society and AARP is that in 2011, there were close to $450 billion of hidden out-of-pocket expenses that families and caregivers had to fund. $450 billion. Now, I don't know how they've come up with that number, but I've heard anything from $250 billion to $450 billion of out-of-pocket expenses, things you never thought you were going to spend money on, whether you thought, well, I have good health insurance, or we're prepared. And it may come down to, well, you had to change your job. You may have had to lose your job. You may have different things that come up that have to be changed in your house based on health conditions. Obviously, treatments. But the $450 billion amount is something that I'd like you to address, just to say, is it money that we find that we had, but we had no intentions of spending, and now we're taking it from somewhere to use? And how is that impacting us? And how can we reduce that amount? That's the killer. If we can come up with a way of saying you don't have to come up with that kind of money that's hidden, what are ways that we can work on that?
Right. Well, there's actually two answers, two ideas came to mind based on your question, Jake. And the first one is more of a story. I think it's helped. I like telling stories because I think we learn best as humans. I think we learn best by hearing stories and examples and so on. So I had a client who I was talking to about, and Jean Marie kind of touched on just a little bit ago about disability insurance. And, you know, I was talking to this client about the need for disability insurance coverage and so on. And a lot of people don't like insurance. They think it's a necessary evil, but they really don't want to spend money on the insurance policy. And it's age-old issue, you know. You don't want to spend the money until you need the coverage, and then it's like, I can't spend enough. But the problem is that if an issue comes up and you are now no longer insurable, then we're kind of stuck. That'll take me to the secondary answer to this question, which is what are some options. So in this person's case, prior to them realizing that they had cancer, we were talking about disability insurance coverage, and they said, pretty typically, I don't want to spend that kind of money on insurance. I'll just punt. I'll take the chance. 6 months later, realizes that he's got cancer, and he's saying, okay, now what? And interesting solution that we came up with. He had just changed jobs and didn't qualify for his group disability insurance coverage through work. And so what we did is we talked to the employer about the situation and had the employer fire him. You might think, wow, what are you talking about? That doesn't sound like a good idea. Well, the benefit was that then he went on unemployment